Continuing in our series on what would Jesus do. And this week we are looking at, are you going or sending? And we're basically looking at missions. Jesus is starting to send the apostles, the 12, into ministry. They've been watching, and now he's about to send them. And so we're going to be at the end of Matthew chapter 9, and then we're going to go into chapter 10, and we'll get to about the middle of chapter 10, and then we will finish chapter 10 another week. Now, Jesus has left Capernaum, which is his home base. Always remember that when Jesus started his ministry, Capernaum was his home base. And he is basically doing his final tour of Galilee. And from here, he's going to go to Decapolis for about 9 months and then go down towards Judea, where he'll ultimately be crucified. And so Matthew's primary concern is not a biography or a history of Jesus, but a manual for the church of his day. That's what Matthew is writing here. And we always want to start with is, what does the Bible say? We always say this, that we believe the Bible is the most fascinating book ever written, but it's deeper than that for us who are Christians. We believe the Bible in its original form was written without error. It was inspired by God, and it's our textbook as Christians. It is what we need to know for us, because that's how God has revealed himself to us. All right, so let's start reading here in Matthew verse 35, and it says that Jesus traveled through all the towns and villages of that area, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. And then verse 36 says, and when he saw the crowds. Now notice the crowds. We've been talking about this now for several weeks. Everywhere Jesus went, there were huge crowds coming to him. Everybody's heard about this man who's healing people. The Pharisees and scribes are all upset. At one point in our previous weeks, they were even saying that Jesus, they couldn't deny that Jesus has been healing people of the demon possession. They were even saying that Satan was giving him the power to do that. And so they weren't even denying that he was actually doing these incredible things. They were just saying that his power wasn't coming from God. His power was coming down from below. It was coming from Satan. And so crowds are coming because everybody's hearing this. And so when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Like sheep without a shepherd. And so we have to realize that there may have been in Galilee, which is Galilee for the most part is very pretty. It's very green. It's very hilly. And when you travel to Israel, Galilee is in the northern part of Israel, and you will see the mountains and the green, the shrubbery. It's when you get further south is when you get more in the desert area of Israel. And there was probably about 200 cities and villages in the area. And there was probably, they estimate around 3 million people that lived in the Galilee area. And these people are hearing about Jesus. And the Bible says that when Jesus saw the crowds that were coming to him, he had compassion because these people were just confused. These people, they just they just didn't have direction, it seemed like, in their life. They had illness, they had sickness, um, they just didn't have direction. I feel like today, people haven't changed. That's one of the things I feel like when we read Scripture. Our culture might look different. We might wear different clothes. We might have different musical tastes. Our food might be different than what they ate back then because we have different ways of cooking and stuff like that. But people haven't changed. Um, People are still needing direction. People are still trying to find themselves. And people are just, it seems with all the advances in science and medical technology, people are still more depressed than ever. People are on more medication than ever for anxiety and all kinds of things. And you go, wow, as far as advanced as we have come, why are people so, with as many people, are people so anxious and feel so alone? When you go to our cities of 1 million people and you go, we live so close to each other, how do you feel so alone? When you grew up in the country like some of my relatives did, they felt more in touch with their neighbors than we do when you look out your door and you can basically see in your neighbor's house. And yet we don't even know who our neighbors are. And so Jesus, when he saw these people, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And sheep, if you know anything about sheep, I had a pastor of mine. Now, again, this was in Tennessee, and he was able to have land, and he went and actually bought some sheep and tended to sheep, not a bunch of sheep, but he had a few sheep because the Bible talks so much about sheep. He wanted to learn about sheep, so when he preached about sheep, he would know more about them. And his learning about sheep is they're like one of the dumbest animals that they needed to be cared for all the time. And so sheep need help, and they need a shepherd. They need somebody to help them constantly. And so Jesus had compassion on them. Verse 37 said, he said to his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. So he has compassion on these people, but there's a problem. There needs to be more help. And so as you go on in this book in Matthew, you see in chapter 13, Jesus speaks of harvest as a judgment time. That when the harvest comes, he's going to talks about harvest as this is when, at the end time with harvest is when judgment is. And so in light of God's coming judgment, Jesus knew that there's a desperate condition of people. So if you equate harvest with judgment, people are lost, and with judgment coming, if they're lost and they die without knowing Christ, and they don't have a second chance. They don't have a second chance to get right with God. And so if people die without knowing Christ, they don't ever have another chance of coming to Christ. And so we need to realize that we need to have compassion. And as I said, there's 3 million people in Galilee at this time. We live in a world right now of approximately 7 billion people. And with the most liberal estimates, about a third of these people could be said to be Christians. A third of these people, of 7 billion, a third could be considered Christians, a third. So that would be 4.5 billion people not knowing Christ. And that's sad when you think about how many people in this world would not know Christ. And that we need to tell them. We need to tell them. Verse 38 says, so pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest. Ask him to send more workers into his field. Now, I find verse 38 fascinating. Jesus doesn't say go. His first response isn't go. His first response is pray. Because you would think his first response is, hey, we need help. You should go. And that's not what Jesus says. His first response is pray. And he beckons us to pray. And Jesus will eventually get to the go part, but he starts with the pray. And the reason I think for that is if he starts with pray, that means all of us then are part of the game. None of us are spectators, because now all of us need to be part of praying. That means no one's if he says some of you should go, then the rest of us would say, well, I'm not supposed to go, then we're left, then we're not part of the mission. Here, he says all of us should pray. Now, all of us should be praying. All of us, even if we don't go into the mission field, that means all of us should be telling people about Christ wherever we are. We might be part of an established ministry or an established church. Some of us might go start a new church, and then some of us might go to a mission field. And that is something we need to pray. What does God want us to do? I've told this story before, but when I was in Bible college, I wanted to be a missionary. Now, many of you don't know me well, but my friends had basically an intervention for me not to be a missionary. My friends pulled me aside. I came into a room, and all my friends were there. I was president of Foreign Missions Fellowship. I was very involved with foreign missions on my campus of my college. And I came into a room one night, and all my friends were there. And I was like, what's going on? And they said, Tim, we need to talk. And I said, what are we going to talk about? And they said, we need to tell you that you do not need to be a missionary. And you would think, what kind of friends did you have that they were trying to talk you out of being a missionary? And my friends understood that I'm an extremely picky eater. And they knew that if I went on the mission field, I was either going to make everybody upset or I was going to starve to death. That was one of the things that was going to happen. And so my friend said, you need to be sending missionaries. You don't need to go to the mission field. Because if you're a missionary, there's nothing worse than going to people's homes. I've got friends of mine that have gone to the mission field and that are either missionaries or who have gone to the mission field that are here, and they talk about going to someone's home, and they tell stories that make me, and I'm just being honest, that make me want to gag. And they talk about going into these people's homes, and they will like kill a goat and just throw everything in that pot, and you don't know what you're eating, and they'll just throw stuff in there. And it's just rude that you don't eat what because they killed something and they're honoring you because you come to eat there. And to me, if they didn't serve up the holy bird, fried chicken, I don't know if I can eat it, and that just be rude. And so my friends knew what was right for me, that I should send missionaries, not go. And they talked me in not going, and I needed to be a prayer, not a goer. And that's what I have done, is tried to send missionaries. And that's sad. It's not something I'm proud of. And my whole ministry has been one of those guys that when people come, like, Pastor, we want to have you over. I'm one of those guys saying, no, I'm sorry, I apologize. If you want to have me over, I know you want me to eat at your house. Here's what I eat. And it's sad. It's embarrassing. It's not something I'm proud about. And my wife, when I got married, my wife told my mother she was a sorry mom that she didn't make me eat things. But I was the kid that would have sat there for 8 hours and not eaten, Not only do I not eat, but I'm stubborn. I got so many problems. I know you think being married to me would be easy. It's not. I'm just telling you, it's not. So, but I got enough problems. Let's go on. Let's go on. So, pray. Pray is what God says. Start with prayer. And so ask him to send more workers into the field. Now, verse 1 of chapter 10, Jesus called his 12 disciples together, gave them authority to cast out evil spirits and to heal every kind of disease and illness. So he calls his 12 disciples together. Now, these would be what we would call the 12 apostles. The 12 disciples are also the 12 apostles. And he gives them the same authority that he has to cast out evil spirits. To be an apostle, the original 12 apostles had to see Jesus after the resurrection and had to experience that. And so all these 12 would have been been with Jesus during that period of time, and they would have been called the original 12, all right? And so he gives them the authority to cast out evil spirits just like them. And they would have been observers of his ministry. And then verse 2 goes into the names of the 12. First Simon, also called Peter. Then Andrew, Peter's brother. James, son of Zebedee. John, James's brother. Philip, Bartholomew. Thomas, Matthew, the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus. Now, Matthew is also called in Mark the son of Alphaeus. There are some that think Matthew, the tax collector, and James, the son of Alphaeus, were brothers. We are not sure of that, or it could be just a coincidence. They both had a father that had the same name. But I also think it's interesting, if it is true that they had the same father, James, the son of Alphaeus, would have probably just been a typical Jew who would have had a tendency to be like most Jews who did not care for the Romans, where Matthew was a tax collector, which meant he went the other direction and worked for the Romans, which meant he was hated. So there would have been a problem within the family, one working for the Romans with the other one despising the Romans, and there would have been estrangement between those two, and only Christ and loving Christ would have brought those two together. That would have been an interesting story, and we won't know until we get to heaven if that was actually true, that they had the same father, or it's just a coincidence. As we say, there's no coincidences in the work of the Lord, but they both at two different places had the same father's name, Alphaeus. Then there's Thaddeus, and then Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who later betrayed him. Now, these are all basically blue-collar workers. None of them are in the Levitical priesthood. None of them work in the synagogue. They're just typical blue-collar guys. I think it's fascinating to me that Jesus picked them not for what they were, but what they would become. And I think what we should do is not romanticize who they were, but see them that God saw them, like I said, for what they would become, and see that there's no excuse for us that why God can't use us. I think it's fascinating that all these guys that Jesus chose were just ordinary people, just like you and I. And there's no excuse why God couldn't use us. So let's go to our second question. How would you describe your attitude towards unbelieving coworkers and neighbors? When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. What factors keep you from feeling compassion from your neighbors or people you work with? Is there anything that just keeps you from just feeling compassion towards others where you wouldn't want to witness to them? talk about that in your hotspot, and then we'll go back. All right, let's go on to verse 5. Because from verse 5 to the end of this chapter, Matthew is recounting instructions Jesus gave the disciples prior to sending them out. So verse 5 is Jesus sent out the 12 apostles with these instructions. Now again, these are 12 apostles. Don't go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans. I want you to get that. Don't go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans, but only to the people of Israel, God's lost sheep. So the first thing he's telling them is, he's telling them where to go and where not to go in the first 5 and 6, these first two verses here, where after he tells who's going, he tells them where to go. So the first wave of missionary work was to focus on the people that they knew best, their own kinsmen. They knew this religion, their language, he knew their religion, he knew their culture, and so he's trying to keep it simple for them. He's sending them out, and he's keeping it simple. And he says, go and announce to them that the kingdom of heaven is near. So second, he tells them what to say. And so we shouldn't be surprised. He's telling them to say basically what I've been telling everybody, what Jesus is telling everybody, that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And this is probably shorthand for a fuller message that they have heard Jesus preach over and over and over in all these different stops. Jesus is just not healing people. He's preaching in the synagogues, he's preaching in people's homes, he's teaching in people's homes, and the disciples are there. And so they have heard this message over and over again. And then verse 8 says, heal the sick, raise the dead, cure those with leprosy, and cast out demons. Give as freely as you have received. So third, Jesus is equipping them to minister to those in great need. And so by virtue of his own divine authority, Jesus has given them the power to do the same miracles that he had been doing up to that point, which is healing all these people and casting out demons. And that these miracles are proving that their message was true, that they were actually speaking on behalf of the Messiah, and that the kingdom of the Messiah was imminent. Verse 9 says, don't take any money in your money belts, no gold, silver, or even copper coins. Verse 10 says, don't carry a traveler's bag with a change of clothes and sandals or even a walking stick. Don't hesitate to accept hospitality, because those who work deserve to be fed. So fourth, Jesus is instructing them to travel lightly, depending on, this makes them depend on God's provision as they travel. Now, they could have spent weeks, days, weeks, even months strategizing, and Jesus is saying, no, you don't need to do that. You don't need to fundraise, just go. I will take care of the rest. This keeps you from getting bogged down and doing any of that. Just go. I want you just to go. And so that's what he's doing. And I find that fascinating, just go. Now, there's two differences between then and now. So we got to be careful when we look at this, because if we're not careful, we might read into this more than we should. Now, there's two differences between the first century context and what we do now. And so first, these original disciples had unique apostolic authority. And we got that from verse 1 of chapter 10. Jesus gave them special power over unclean spirits, demon possession, and the ability to heal diseases and to raise the dead and cleanse lepers. We see that the Gospel Luke tells us that Jesus gave the same kind of authority to the 70 when he sent out the 70 disciples to do the same thing. In Luke chapter 10, he gave them the same. Now, we need to realize these are apostles. These are apostles. And we don't have apostles today. We don't have apostles. Now, how many apostles were there? How many apostles were there? Just in your head, how many were there? As you're thinking, I want you to think of another thing. The mission of these guys had a unique scope, and we'll get back to the answer. I'll give you the answer of how many apostles there were. They had a unique scope. They were given an inclusive ministry just to Jews. They were not to go to Samaritans or Gentiles. Now, when Jesus died and was resurrected, he told his disciples, these same people, to go to the entire ends of the world. He told them to go to everybody, not just to the Jews. So this is a very unique, this is their first run. This is a practice mission. And again, they're apostles. There's only 14 apostles. There's 14 of them. Now, how do we get 14? There was the original 12. Judas committed suicide, so that left 11. So there was 12. Now we lose one. And then they picked Matthias in Acts chapter 1 to take his place. Now some people say, well, they shouldn't have picked Matthias because Paul was supposed to be that guy. That's not true. Matthias was the 12th guy. So Matthias plus the original 12 makes 13, right? If my math is correct, 1 plus 12 is 13, right? So Matthias was the 12th guy who took Judas's place. And the reason why we know Matthias was supposed to be the first guy, because when Peter was speaking in Acts chapter 2, it says he stepped forward with the other 11, which would have been Matthias. In Acts chapter 6, it says the 12 called a meeting of all believers and said, you know, hey, we 12 should be studying the Bible, and we need to pick what most think were the first deacons. So Matthias is considered one of the 12 apostles at that point. Paul is now considered an apostle to the Gentiles. Now, Paul is an exception because the Lord appeared to him in Arabia in a vision. And so Paul, the Bible says and Paul himself said in 1 Corinthians 15:5, he says he was seen by Peter, this is talking about Paul, and then by the 12. So Paul says he went and saw the 12, which would have included Matthias. And then in 1 Corinthians 15:8 and 9, he's talking about himself and seeing Jesus, and he was talking about in 15:5, Jesus appeared to Peter and then the 12. He's talking about how Jesus appeared to him. He said, last of all, as though I'd been born at the wrong time, I also saw him, talking about Paul saw Jesus, for I am the least of all apostles. And he explained that in Galatians, that he was in a vision, he saw Jesus, and Jesus appeared to him. And so Paul got an exception, even though he was not he did not see Jesus in the flesh. He saw Jesus in a vision, and he was an apostle to the Gentiles, as Peter was an apostle to the Jews. So you got the original 12 plus Matthias makes 13, plus Paul gives us 10, and 4 is 14. Make sense? All right. So they had special gifts that we would not have today. All right? Now, verse 11 says, whenever you enter a city or a village, search for a worthy person and stay in his home until you leave town. When you enter the home, give it your blessing. If it turns out to be a worthy home, let your blessing stand. If it is not, take back the blessing. If any household or town refuses to welcome you or listen to your message, shake its dust from your feet as you leave. I tell you the truth, the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah will be better off than such a town on Judgment Day. We call this, they are looking for a person of peace. So they are to go into a town with no money, nothing there to keep, they're not to have any provisions. And they're going to town looking for people of peace that will be hospitable, put them up, take care of them, feed them. And God is preparing these people to take care of them and put them up. That doesn't mean they're Christians. It doesn't mean that they believe in their cause. They're just kind people that are willing to listen and put them up. And there are mission societies today that still kind of operate this way, that people go out into a town and look for people that will just be hospitable and love on them. And that's what they call people of peace. And you can actually type in people of peace on a Google search, and you will find missionary societies that will talk about that and that are still using this strategy to this day. Okay? What criteria do you think Jesus might have used in selecting his 12 disciples? Talk about that in your hot spots, and then come on back and we'll wrap this up and how we can obey ourselves in this culture. All right, let's finish this up. How can you obey? How can we apply some of this stuff we've seen here in the 21st century? Well, remember that we have similar motives and methods. We are to be moved just like Jesus and the disciples. We are to be moved by compassion for the lost, and we need to pray to the Lord for the harvest. And so we need to be praying for lost people on a daily basis. Second, we need to remember that the reaping of the harvest is to be done by all believers, not just the ones we send on the mission field. We need to be trying to share Christ wherever we are here in where we live. And remember that we are to model the character and commitment of Christ. We are Christ imagers. As it's been said many times, we're the only Bible that many people ever read. And so we need to image Christ to others. We need to remember that. So what does this passage say about Jesus? To me, it tells me that it hurts the Lord when he sees his creation hurt and confused and messed up. He had compassion on them. And so when he sees people drifting, not having direction in life, not knowing why God made them, why he created them, why they don't understand their purpose in life, that hurts him. And so he has compassion on these people. And what is my takeaway? Well, for me, the takeaway is that you and I are the hands and feet of Jesus, that he wants you and I to share with others, that we are to tell them why they're here, what their purpose is, what God wants out of their lives, for them to follow him, for them to understand that God loves them, that Jesus died for them, that they can have spend eternity with him, that he loves them so much that God provided a way for them to escape damnation, escape eternal separation from God. And we have the good news that we need to share with them. That's my takeaway. When people truly understand how loving God is, I think that's incredible. So many people think God is judgmental because we as Christians are so judgmental. And I think that's so sad. I think it's terrible. I hope you think about that this week as you strive to become more like Christ as we study the Bible, serve others, and share our faith together. Would you be willing to go out to cities in your state without a car, cash, or suitcase? How would that make you feel?
Feel free to contact Crosswaves and tell us all about your experience. We would love to hear from you. Send us your prayer requests or questions about the Bible or Crosswaves Church. To keep up to date, visit our Facebook page and subscribe to the Crosswaves YouTube channel. We want to say thank you to all you who donate online or send checks to Crosswaves Church through our app or website. Thank you for being a generous Christian and fueling the mission to reach more and more people for Christ.
You know what time it is? You know what time it is? Do you know what time it is? Joke of the week, where we only promise that 3 out of 10 jokes are actually funny. 3 out of 10 jokes are actually funny. Here we go. Guy's looking for a cab, and he's looking, and all of a sudden, cab comes down the street, and he waves at the cab, and the cabbie just stops, and he jumps in, and he goes, "Whew, man, I'm so glad I found you." And the cabbie goes, "Man, you just have perfect timing, just like that guy, Bill." And the guy goes, "Who?" He said, "Bill Smith. Man, that guy did everything right," the cabbie said. Like coming along just when you needed a cab, it would have happened just like that for Bill. Just every time when Bill needed a cab, the cab would have been just there. "Nah," the man said to the cabbie, "there's always a few clouds over everybody." Not Bill, said the cabbie. "He was a terrific athlete. He could have gone pro. You name the sport. He could have played it, man. Bill could have played any sport." "Nah, he couldn't have played any sport. I'm telling you, Bill could have done anything. He could have sang like an opera singer. He had a baritone voice. He could have danced like a Broadway star. Bill was something else, man. I'm telling you, he was something else. I mean, I'm telling you." And this guy goes, "Wow, man, Bill was something else." "I'm telling you, man, Bill had a memory like a steel trap. He could remember everybody's birthday. He knew about wine. He knew about cars. He knew about everything. He even knew which fork to use. He could fix anything. Anything going wrong with your car, he could fix it. Man, he could do anything." And this guy's going, "Man, this Bill sounds like something, man. He seems like something. I'm surprised. I'm surprised, man. Is he like your best friend? Is he somebody you hang out with all the time?" And he goes, No. I've actually never met Bill," said the cabbie. "You've never met Bill? Sounds like you know everything about Bill. How do you know so much about Bill?" He says, "Well, I married Bill's widow." That's how he knew Bill. Took a long way to get there. Thank you for staying with me. Hey, if you've got a joke for us, send it to us at jokes@Crosswaves Church. And we hope you have a fun week. Take care.